Prologue, The Day the Sky Wept Ash. Year 108, Eastern Region, Floor 7, Grand Celestial Tower. The Grand Celestial Tower stood as a testament to the Eastern region's architectural prowess, its spires piercing the heavens, adorned with intricate carvings of dragons and phoenixes. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the distant hum of monks chanting sutras resonated through the halls. Within the tower's sanctum, 7 cloaked figures convened around a circular stone dais, each representing one of the 7 thrones. The atmosphere was tense, the silence palpable. At the center of the dais knelt a boy, barely 11, his raven-black hair disheveled and his kimono singed at the edges. Tears carved paths through the soot on his cheeks as he stared at the lifeless body of his older brother, a revered knight whose armor now bore the scars of an intense battle. Baranochi Anto's small hands trembled as he reached out to grasp his brother's katana, its blade still warm. The weight of the weapon was unfamiliar, yet it felt destined to be in his grasp. Suddenly, the chamber floor quaked. A surge of energy erupted from the tower's core, radiating outward in concentric waves. Ancient seals etched into the stone walls glowed briefly before shattering, releasing a blinding light that shot skyward, piercing the clouds. In the slums of Floor 1, a young boy scavenging for food paused, his eyes reflecting the unnatural glow above. Sparks danced around his fingertips unbidden. He dropped the stolen rice ball, his heart pounding. Zakuro Kenshi felt an unfamiliar warmth coursing through his veins, a sensation both exhilarating and terrifying. In the southern region, twin sisters Emmy and May awoke simultaneously in separate servant quarters, both gasping from the same dream of roots, echoes, and lightning. Their paths, though divergent now, were destined to intertwine. In the northern region, Ren Kazami's training was interrupted as frost formed beneath his feet, his instructor collapsing mid-motion. The young noble's fists trembled, not from fear, but from an awakening power he couldn't comprehend. On Floor 9 of the Western region, Ayumi Tachibana set aside a forbidden scroll she had secretly unsealed. Her eyes gleamed with newfound understanding. The wind in her chamber stirred violently, though no windows were open. Deep within the central region's shrine ruins, Daigo Kassen looked up from meditation as ripples of light danced across the water. He whispered a name in a language long forgotten, and the beads around his wrist hummed in response. Far beyond, in the desolate outlands of Anglacia, a lone figure knelt before a fractured altar of bone and gold. Cloaked in tattered silk and surrounded by lifeless bodies, she raised her hands toward the fading glow in the sky. Sister Veska smiled. Another throne has fallen. The light vanished as swiftly as it had appeared. The world did not end. The sky remained intact. But across Asteria, 7 threads had been irrevocably, Chapter 1, Embers of the Past. Year 110, Eastern Region, Floor 1, Ceremonial Square. The morning sun cast a golden hue over Ceremonial Square, its rays filtering through the cherry blossom trees that lined the training grounds. The square bustled with activity as aspiring warriors honed their skills under the watchful eyes of seasoned instructors. Zakuro Kenshi stood before a wooden training dummy, his fists clenched. Sweat dripped from his brow as he launched a series of rapid strikes, each blow echoing through the square. With a final, forceful punch, the dummy's head snapped back, splinters flying. "Ow! Ow!" Zakuro exclaimed, shaking his hand vigorously. "Who makes the head out of stone?" From the shade of a nearby pavilion, Daigo Kassen observed with a bemused expression. The elder's weathered features betrayed a life of hardship, his eyes sharp and discerning. "Perhaps the same kind of fool who punches stone as a warm-up," Daigo remarked, taking a sip from his gourd. Zakuro turned, rubbing his bruised knuckles. "Come on, old man. You said I needed discipline. I'm trying." Daigo raised an eyebrow. "Trying to break your own bones isn't discipline. It's folly wrapped in enthusiasm." Around them, the square buzzed with the sounds of clashing wooden swords and the shouts of instructors correcting stances. The scent of sweat mingled with the aroma of blooming cherry blossoms, creating a unique atmosphere of serenity and intensity. Zakuro gazed upward, his eyes tracing the towering structures of Floor 2 that loomed above. The intricate architecture, with its curved roofs and ornate carvings, symbolized the pinnacle of martial achievement. "Think I'll ever reach that high?" he mused. Daigo responded without looking. "That depends. Do you wish to climb or soar?" Before Zakuro could reply, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Make way! Incoming from floor 3! A procession of armored warriors descended the grand staircase, their movements synchronized and precise. At their center stood a young man, his presence commanding attention. Baranoshi Anto. His crimson and gold armor gleamed in the sunlight, the emblem of the Eastern Guard emblazoned on his chest. His jet black hair was tied back neatly, and his eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the square. As his gaze settled on Zakuro, the crowd fell silent. You, Baranochi called out, his voice firm. You're the one who bested Lieutenant Ren during the unranked exhibition 2 weeks ago. Zakuro blinked, taken aback. I, might have gotten lucky. No, Baranochi stated flatly. You didn't. He stepped forward, pointing to the center of the square. You'll spar with me, now. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Zakuro laughed nervously. Wait, now? As in, right now. Baranoshi nodded once. Daigo smiled quietly behind his gourd. Zakuro exhaled slowly, his blood humming. All right, fancy hair. Let's see if lightning strikes twice. As they squared off, high above them, in a glass observation tower that pierced into floor 2, Ayumi Tachibana adjusted her glasses and murmured to herself. It begins. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2, or expand on specific aspects of Chapter 1? Certainly. Let's continue the story with Chapter 2, expanding on the emerging tensions and developments after the intense confrontation in Chapter 1. Chapter 2, The Burning Spark. Year 110, Eastern Region, Floor 1, Ceremonial Square. The clash of fists and the crackling tension between Zakuro and Baranoshi echoed through the air. Zakuro's heart raced as he locked eyes with the young knight, who stood perfectly still, a regal calmness exuding from every inch of his form. It was as if he had been born for this moment, for this fight. Zakuro, by contrast, was just a street urchin trying to survive. You ready, Zakuro? Daigo called out from the sidelines, his voice steady but laced with a hint of amusement. The old man leaned on his gnarled staff, a knowing look in his eyes. Zakuro cracked his knuckles, his breathing steady despite the rising storm in his chest. I'll show him what survival really means. The crowd, which had gathered in anticipation, parted to form a wide circle around the two combatants. A few onlookers whispered excitedly about the sparring match between Zakuro, the boy with surprising skill, and Baranochi, the youngest of the 7 knights, a warrior whose reputation had already spread far beyond the eastern region. Baranoshi took a few slow steps forward, his expression unreadable. He flicked his wrist, and his katana, sheathed at his side, caught the light in a brilliant flash. The knight's movements were graceful yet purposeful, like a dancer preparing to strike. Show me what you've got, Baranochi said, his voice calm, but there was a slight edge to it, like the challenge was both an invitation and a test. He didn't expect Zakuro to win, but he was curious to see just how far the boy had come. Zakuro smirked, his eyes narrowing. His fists clenched, and he felt that familiar warmth growing inside him, the power that had awakened in him when the strange light had exploded from the sky just a few days earlier. The air around him seemed to hum with electricity, his senses sharper, his movements more fluid. He bounced on the balls of his feet, testing his stance. I don't back down from anyone, he muttered to himself, more to calm his nerves than anything else. Before Zakuro could react, Baranoshi was on him. The young knight moved with blinding speed, his katana unsheathing in one fluid motion. A blur of steel flashed as Baranoshi's blade sliced toward Zakuro's side, but the street urchin reacted instinctively, dodging at the last moment and throwing an open palm strike toward his opponent's chest. The impact was like slamming into a stone wall. Baranoshi barely moved, his armored chest absorbing the blow without flinching. Your strength isn't enough to overcome the weight of my discipline, he said, his voice as cold as the steel he wore. Zakuro, winded by the failed attack, staggered back a step. He couldn't rely solely on strength here. He had to be smarter, faster. He had to learn, adapt, and use the power inside him to its full potential. Without thinking, his fingers twitched, and he unleashed a flurry of strikes aimed at Baranoshi's exposed side. Baranoshi blocked them all with ease, his movements graceful but precise. He was in complete control of the situation, though a faint hint of approval flashed in his eyes. You're quick, Baranoshi remarked, his voice carrying a slight note of respect. But speed alone won't be enough. You have to control the flow of battle. Zakuro's eyes burned with determination. I'm not giving up that easily. With a yell, Zakuro summoned all his strength into one massive punch aimed straight at Baranoci's chest. This time, however, something different happened. A surge of energy burst from Zakuro's fist, his palm glowing with an ethereal, crackling light that seemed to distort the very air around him. Baranoci's expression shifted. The young knight raised his katana to deflect, but before he could react fully, Zakuro's punch slammed into his blade with a shockwave that sent him stumbling back, his feet skidding across the stone ground. The crowd gasped in surprise, a murmur of awe spreading through the onlookers. Zakuro stood there, chest heaving, his body pulsing with raw power. He had never felt anything like it, the intense energy flowing through him like a wildfire. His eyes glowed faintly with the same light that had coursed through his veins during the strange celestial event. Baranoshi regained his composure, his gaze now sharpened with something akin to respect, or perhaps curiosity. So you've awakened it. Zakuro's breath caught in his throat. Awakened what? Baranoshi slowly straightened, sheathing his katana. That was no ordinary punch. I felt it, the power you're tapping into. It's unlike anything I've seen before, even among the 7 knights. Zakuro's mind raced. The strange force within him had been growing, but this was the first time it had manifested in such an obvious way. He had no idea what it was, but he could feel it, a fire burning inside him, urging him forward. Daigo watched from the sidelines, his expression unreadable. Well now, Zakuro, you've certainly caught his attention. Zakuro wiped sweat from his brow, still unsure what had just transpired. Does this mean I won? Baranashi gave him a half smile, a rare expression for the usually stoic knight. For today, yes, but this isn't over, not by a long shot. The crowd buzzed with excitement, but Zakuro barely heard them. He was too focused on the feeling inside him, the strange energy that had propelled him to do something beyond his normal reach. He had barely tapped into it, yet it felt like the key to something much greater. For the first time in his life, Zakuro felt like he wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to become something more. End of Chapter 2. This chapter builds off the events from Chapter 1, introducing Zakuro's mysterious power and his first encounter with Baranashi. This sets up the intrigue surrounding the awakening of their elemental abilities, while also showcasing the dynamic between the two characters and Zakuro's potential growth. Would you like to continue or dive deeper into specific characters or plotlines? Certainly. Let's continue the story with Chapter 3, where the aftermath of the battle begins to unfold and new relationships and potential conflicts emerge. At Chapter 3, Whispers of the Future. Year 110, Eastern Region, Floor 1, Daigo's home. The night was cool and crisp, the sky dotted with twinkling stars above. The sounds of the bustling city faded as Zakuro made his way home, his thoughts clouded with confusion and excitement. His muscles ached from the sparring session, but it was a satisfying pain, a reminder of how far he had come in such a short time. Zakuro. Daigo's voice rang out as the young boy approached the small, cluttered house that had been his home for the past few months. The old man was sitting outside, his long staff resting by his side. His piercing eyes, though softened by age, held a depth that made Zakuro uneasy at times. Zakuro had never been one for long conversations, but Daigo was different. The old man had taken him in when no one else had, and for that, he was grateful. He approached the elderly figure, pausing just a few feet away. I've been thinking about what happened today, Daigo said, his tone deliberate, as if weighing each word. Your power, it's not something I've seen in years, perhaps even decades. Zakuro frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. What do you mean? That burst of energy, you think it was something special? Daigo gave him a slow, knowing smile. Special? That's an understatement. What you felt today, Zakuro, is the power of a spirit user. Spirit user? Zakuro repeated the word, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I've never heard of it before. I know. You've never been taught the true martial arts. You've been surviving on instinct. But what you tapped into today was something deeper. Spirit users have the ability to channel their own soul's energy into physical forms, punches, strikes, and even elemental forces. It's a rare gift, one that's been dormant for generations. Zakuro's heart began to race. He had heard whispers of such powers in passing, but no one had ever explained them in detail. So, you think that's what I've awakened? Daigo nodded, his expression solemn. Yes, but it's not something that can be mastered overnight. The power within you is wild, untamed. It could consume you if you're not careful. Zakuro's mind buzzed with questions. How was this possible? He had no training, no guidance, just a street urchin with nothing but a will to survive. And yet, he had felt the power surge within him, an untapped force that had been awakened by his sheer determination. What do I need to do? Zakuro asked, his voice quiet but determined. Daigo stood up, his old bones creaking as he gripped his staff. You'll need to learn how to control it, Zakuro, but not just the power inside you, the way of the martial artist. It's not enough to fight with instinct alone. You need discipline. Focus. If you truly wish to become more than just another street fighter, you must learn the foundations of our art. Zakuro's gaze hardened. I'm ready. I want to learn. Daigo studied him for a moment, as though searching for something hidden beneath Zakuro's exterior. Very well. I'll teach you, but know this. The path of a spirit user is not an easy one, and you will not be the only one to walk it. Others like me? Zakuro asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, Daigo replied, his tone heavy with meaning. There are others out there, some much more skilled than you, and you will meet them soon enough. But for now, we begin with the basics. The next morning, Zakuro awoke to the smell of hot rice and vegetables. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a golden hue over the world outside. The city had a different feel in the early hours, calm, quiet, as if the streets were holding their breath before the chaos of the day began. Zakuro sat up, stretching, and made his way to the small kitchen area where Daigo was already preparing breakfast. The old man looked up as Zakuro entered, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Eat. You'll need your strength today. Zakuro sat down at the table and began eating. The meal was simple but filling, and it gave him the energy he needed for the tasks ahead. Daigo's training regimen was grueling. It began with the basics: breathing exercises, stretching, and learning to harness his energy in small, controlled bursts. Zakuro had a natural affinity for martial arts, but controlling the flow of his power was another matter entirely. He had to learn patience, something that came less easily to him than the bursts of raw instinct he had relied on in the past. Over the following weeks, Zakuro found himself training for hours each day, his body growing stronger and more agile as he learned the proper techniques. Daigo was a harsh but effective teacher, pushing Zakuro to his limits with every lesson. You're improving, Daigo said one evening, after a particularly grueling session. But there's more you need to learn. Your power is growing stronger. Soon, you'll be able to access more advanced techniques, moves that could change the course of a battle. Zakuro wiped sweat from his brow, his muscles sore, but his resolve unbroken. I'm ready, he said, his voice firm. Daigo looked at him with a rare glint of approval in his eyes. We'll see. But remember, the real test is not in how powerful you become. It's in how well you can control that power when the time comes. Later that week, news arrived in the form of a messenger from the upper floors. The message was brief but ominous. The eastern region is preparing for war. Zakuro had heard rumors of conflict brewing in the northern territories, but hearing it confirmed was a jolt to his system. War was on the horizon, an event that would change everything. Daigo's face hardened as he read the letter aloud. The Seven Thrones have called for unity, but it seems some regions are not content with peace. The time for tournaments may soon be over. Zakuro felt a chill run down his spine. Tournament fights were where the warriors proved their worth, their skill, and their honor. But if war was truly coming, the games would no longer be the focus. The streets, the cities, the entire world would be consumed by conflict. And Zakuro realized with a sudden clarity that his training was no longer just for survival. It was for something greater, for a future where he could stand as more than just a boy from floor 1. He had the power now. But would it be enough? End of chapter 3. In chapter 3, we see Zakuro's progression as he begins to master his newfound abilities under Daigo's guidance. The chapter also introduces a pivotal moment as the looming threat of war is revealed, setting the stage for the conflict that will drive much of the story forward. Would you like to explore any particular character or subplot further? Or would you like to continue with the next chapter?